Welcome back. So I wanted to start the week update with something kind of interesting. I've been waiting a while for the batteries to get to this point. I knew they would at some point in this transitional period, in this shoulder period. So I apologize for the lateness of the hour. They got away from me a little bit today, but I wanted to bring this to you kind of as I did it, so I hope you can see me okay. So at the end of our total solar day, we wound up sitting a little above 20%, 23%, 24%, something of that nature. And so, as you know from our previous videos, if we end the total solar day at or slightly above 20%, we're going to lose 20% of battery power or so over the course of the day, between the total, when total solar day is calculated at the end of solar production to the beginning of solar contribution tomorrow. So we run the risk of not being able to make it to first solar contribution tomorrow, right? And so what I'm going to do now, and pull up a couple of screenshots here. Right now we're sitting at about 18%. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and put the system back on its self-powered mode with the grid switched on, and I'm going to have the reserve set to 0. And what that will do is it will allow the batteries to completely deplete before it pulls any power from the grid itself. And so, though we won't still be on zombie apocalypse mode, now I'd like to see and show everybody what happens when you do actually deplete the batteries fully, and see how they recover when they're just given sunlight. I think that'd be a really interesting thing to show everybody. So let's go ahead and switch the grid back on. All right, well, we're back on grid power. I'll go ahead and take a little quick screenshot of this here. This is a little annoying. Right now, I turned the grid power back on and immediately it went to supplying from the grid. About 40 minutes ago or so, I had set the system back on self-power, but it hasn't taken yet. Again, you have that kind of update period that where you have this lag. I thought that I might have gotten away with it because I thought I might have waited long enough for it to have gone straight drawing from the batteries, but apparently not. Also, again, back to some of the things that we'd spoken of in some of the very early videos where we had the system offline. In other words, it was not, for whatever reason, communicating to Tesla's systems. The gateway was not, I don't know whether it was not getting a Wi-Fi signal or what was going on. So for the better part of the last, I don't know, several hours, that's the reason why, part of the reason why it had gotten dark on us here is because I wasn't able to communicate with the system, so I couldn't come back to turn it on, so there was that little delay. But I'm hearing everything kind of clicking. You hear that? So it's trying to sort something out right now, now that it's back on. Up, and there it goes. Okay, so good, and I'll take a quick picture of this here. And we're drawing battery power again, and again working to depleting that again. Like I said, we're sitting at about 18%. And let's take a look and see what we have come morning, and then we'll finish off this little quick update, and then we'll get on with dissecting what our entire week looked like. Well, here we are in the morning. We're just prior to where we might start our solar contribution for the day. We're sitting at 1%. So we'll probably just make it by the skin of our teeth is what I'm thinking. Probably in another 40 minutes to an hour we'll get to that point where, as long as the home doesn't use too much, we'll hit that matching period where the solar contribution will match the general use of the home, and then the batteries will be able to take, you know, some of the slack until we get maybe later in the day, where we'll probably just barely be producing on average more than the home uses. But this is a culmination of a week that, as you'll see in the review when we get back over to the studio, gave us a few days where we were producing more than we used, and then overall near the tail end, as we got ready towards this rainy patch, it started to drop down lower and lower. And again, that's pretty typical for this time of year. And so now, as opposed to the way that we handled this before, where we simply put the system at a reserve point to reserve 10 or 20%, this particular storm I didn't reserve anything, so we went ahead and depleted it. And again, the last time, then what we did was once the system had been depleted, we then turned around and set the entire thing to go to put all of the solar power back into the batteries. Well, this time we're not going to do that. This time what we're going to do is we're simply going to set it like people normally would and see what the system does when the system is set as Tesla thinks that everybody should be setting it. And we'll see how that varies, as opposed to what I feel that we should be doing, and what I suppose many others feel that we should be doing, and that is that on days like today during off-peak, we should actually be putting a charge in the battery. Maybe not full charge, but at least the partial charge, 60–70%. That worked out pretty well for us the last time when we did it off of solar power. So there's no reason to think that that wouldn't be a good modality. But to be fair, let's see what happens. Now, obviously, the biggest problem here is that we don't have, if the power were to go out now, we'd be screwed. There would be no way to, we have no backup. We didn't save any power. So we'll have to deal with that if it happens. That'd be embarrassing. You know, here you are with 90 kilowatts of battery power in your garage and your lights are off because you're a dumbass. But anyway, so that's about all I have to say for this. We're not real, obviously, you saw the rain. We're not going to be gaining anything on it today. And so I'm just going to have some coffee and enjoy the rainy weather. And then let's go ahead and head back over to the studio in a couple of days and close out our second week and see how we did. Okay, well, we are back here at the studio to close out week 2 of our second month. How cool is that? So, as I said, as we closed out the previous week, that we had some stormy weather come our way on the 8th and the 9th, and then that would have been followed by a couple days of decent weather, and so we placed the system on zombie apocalypse mode on the 4th, and the total solar day percentage at that point was right around 60%. So by the start of our second week, we were running 56% or so, and not too bad. But we knew, like I said, we had some stormy weather ahead, and it didn't disappoint. By the start of our second week, let's see, so here we see on the 8th, we got some rain, but there were enough breaks in the weather that it allowed us some decent charging. And then what you have to remember about this is that, for the last couple of weeks, day by day, the sun keeps getting higher and higher and higher, and the days slightly longer and longer. And so it starts to have a profound effect on the daily totals, even when there's just short breaks in the cloud cover. It really has an opportunity for the peak power to really come in. On the 8th here, you saw that we're at 6.7 kilowatts at our peak, so looking pretty good there. So we'll split the day here up. First we'll do the numbers here that you see. 19.2 kilowatt hours produced, 26.6 kilowatt hours used. And this the next page here, this is where we'll eventually start cataloging the vehicle usage once we start driving again, and then obviously the notes of the day. And I'll try and, whenever I find something of merit to present to you here, I'll use this format so folks can see it a little better. We had some of the comments where they said that it was a little hard to see, so we'll split it up this way. And don't, if I skip over something, especially the notes, don't worry if you miss out or feel that you're missing out on any of that. When we close the month out, I'll be sure we'll be going through it day by day, just like we did in the previous month closeout, so you won't miss anything. And so before we move on, I would like to thank Chris Hill for his comment here. He got me thinking. Chris had asked about the system running when it's not topped off. That he recognized, oh well, maybe that's probably not the best thing in the world to do, is to top it off. And so when I was replying to Chris, it got me really thinking about, ooh, well, okay, so that's the simple answer, is that he's absolutely right that you shouldn't do that. But these shoulder periods, it's a lot more complex than that. As we saw on the tail end of last week, we were actually climbing up, and this week as well, but only for a couple of days. And so as we start to hash out how these systems should be set up to run autonomously, we're going to have to look at a whole bunch of different factors in what our decision is to decide how far do we charge up, and because you get into a situation where, ooh, or you think that you have several stormy days coming up, and that the best way to deal with that is to keep that system topped off, and then maybe put the extra into the vehicle, because again, it's winter. The last thing you want to do is be sending it out to the grid. That's asinine. But there are times when the answer to Chris's question becomes a little more difficult. If you think that you're going to have those periods of rainy days, and then they don't show up. And so then here the system is, peaked out, and you've got several days. Well, do you deplete it? How do you use that? But then, as you saw, you run into that situation where if you don't, if you don't keep it topped off at 100%, in the possibility that you'll wind up having a string of days that you'll have to deal with, and you pull too much off, and then the changeable weather throws you a curveball, now you're kind of stuck. So great question, Chris. Thanks for that. Again, that's one of those things that as we address this, we'll just have to take a look at it and see what our ultimate solution is going to be. It's going to be a hybrid solution, because again, we have to deal with that changeable weather. So with the system as it stands now, we should be able to identify some modes that will allow us to deal with those fluctuations. So with that on the table, let's go ahead and take a look at the 9th and beyond. The important thing to recognize about what Chris said was that he used the term continuous good solar days. And as we move into a more spring-like condition, we're going to be in an overproduction mode. And certainly that then is going to be the order of the day. The toughest part to deal with is this time right now where we've got so much changeable weather. So, trying to judge where those good solar days will come, that's the big trick. So at any rate, so here we have the 9th, and what I found is that the 2- and 3-day forecasts seem to be the best ones to deal with when you start looking at the 4th, 5th day out. then it becomes a little more dodgy. But here on the 9th, we've got the total solar day percentage at 36. Our usage there was 23.5, and we managed to produce about 13. Not too bad for the day that it was. We were, still on zombie apocalypse mode, but you can see that total solar day percentage is in shortfall. So now it's coming down. And here we have the notes for that day. Again, just like what I said, another rainy day. It's overcast and dreary. I was surprised that we got the amount of production out of it that we did. That was good. So I'd hoped that we would wind up getting 40%. Then that would be a good easy two days to calculate out that we had, but I didn't quite make 40%. And now for the 10th, let's pull up some other screenshots here and give you all an idea of what a pretty typical day looks like. And we'll start with the home's use here. Pull that up. We see lots of little 1.5 to 1.7 kilowatt spikes or humps throughout the day at fairly regular intervals. And this is the large home circulating fan. The idea being there that it saves on gas for the entire home, and it does. The hot air rises up, and then in a normal home the system would simply use a separate zone and then apply heating just on the bottom of the house to try and maintain that more or less equal temperature, or if one setting was higher or lower, that the system would try to deal with that. Our house, the way it's set up, it deals with it a little bit differently. It looks at the entire home as a unit, and so to save energy, it circulates heat from the top floor of the house down to the bottom floor and tries to keep both as equal as possible in that way. And to do so, again, it hits that home fan fairly frequently. And so I'd actually love to see how this kind of compares to your own usage there. As you can see, you see those humps, and that rises over a baseline home use of about 0.5 kilowatt, 0.7 kilowatts. Certain lights stay on. Obviously, the refrigerator stays on 24/7. We have a small like a pond pump. We have a little fountain in the front courtyard there, which is kind of nice for ambiance. But it'd be interesting to see how that compares to what some of you have for baseline load. So feel free to give a comment on that. Our usage in November, December, and early January was greater, because during those months when the heater runs, that length of time that those fans are on is longer, sometimes as much as an hour, and so that tended to drive up the usage for those months. And now, as the weather is starting to warm up, you're getting more heat from the sun during the day. Those fans just simply don't have to work as hard, and so the overall consumption is starting to come down. And so then on this one here, we'll overlay the battery usage over the top of the home load, so that we can take a look there at about what is a typical day. And then we see where the battery is discharging to the home. The green, obviously above the line, is where the battery is supplying the home, and then anything below the line is where the battery is actually charging. And so then back to what Chris was saying, you can see that the charge going into the battery was fractured and jagged, and we even see that spike at 2 p.m. where there was some cooking going on, and that you can see by those little jagged areas that cooking was going on right when the cloud cover was coming over. So that was interesting there. And so that gives you a pretty clear snapshot of what makes this time of year so difficult. You have that definition of good solar days. Well, shoot, you know, this was a good solar day, but you can see that it's still, you know, if certain things happen at the wrong time, that that can be interesting, and we'll go over that again a little bit later. And as we get to that point, I don't want to give any spoilers away here, but we had an interesting day. And so then here we will overlay the solar, and so again you can see how that mirrors the amount of charge that we were able to put into the battery. And so that's kind of an interesting graph to look at. And so now let's pull up some numbers for that day and see what we saw overall. So here's the 10th, the same day that those other graphs were pulled up on. Again, we're still in zombie apocalypse mode. The grid was completely shut off. Total solar day percentage is pretty good. You know, we had a decent day. You know, as you can see there, solar production was 31.3 kilowatt hours, and we had used 22.7, and that's about a typical use pattern seems to be for this time of year. And so that shows what I was talking about the rising sun. You know, where a month ago, you know, a sunny day would give us maybe 25, 26 kilowatt hours. You know, now we're into the 30s. Even with the clouds, we still manage 31.3. I suppose our production would probably peak this time of year somewhere around 35 or so, maybe 37 if we were really lucky to have a completely clear day. And again, here's the notes for that day. Basically what I just said. And here on the 11th, very similar, again still on zombie apocalypse mode. Our total solar day percentage again creeping up because the home usage is still pretty nominal. We used 22.7 kilowatt hours and produced 34.7. So, and then here we have the notes. Again, 8% solar, 8% increase in the total solar day percentage. Pretty impressive. And that brings us to our
Zombie Apocalypse Mode special update.
So for our Zombie Apocalypse Mode special update this week, we're going to go ahead and review the period between the 5th and the 13th. And so pull this up here. That shows our usage off of the grid between the 5th and the 13th. That's our total grid use. And we weren't even done. We actually ran off grid entirely until the 13th. So that gave us a total of 9 days, which is pretty good run, I thought. And I'll toss up some other weekly graphs here so that you can see how much the home was actually using at the time. Here we go, boom. So you can see that we're not just running the home at bare minimums, we're actually supplying a decent amount of power. This one here shows the total production for that week. So you kind of see that as it flows, and then total production as compared with the Powerwall units charging and discharging. So that's an interesting kind of a thing to see, the correlation between all of that. And then we'll take a look at supply versus load here. This the blue is obviously the consumption of the home. Yellow is our solar production, and that again helps us paint a pretty clear picture of what's going on for those days. And then lastly, we'll pull here up. This is the raw numbers for that period again, just to kind of show that you know we didn't just shut the entire home off. The home was actually running at its average for this time of year. Pretty impressive. So forecasting, it helped us make our determination as to when to start this run. All right, but forecasting isn't all there is to it. Obviously, it's important that any predictive system be nimble. And you know, again, back to that whole thing of at what state do you keep the charge? If you don't have any charge in the batteries, you don't really have any options. And again, we got asked a lot early on in the project, do you really need that much additional capacity? And the answer still is, well, we don't know. But certainly what you're seeing here is having that extra capacity is a huge benefit during this shoulder period, because it allows the system to remain nimble. And we'll talk about that as we go further on into the week. But that does allow us that opportunity to just make a better decision days out as to what we're going to do, as opposed to having to do it moment by moment. And then as we end our zombie apocalypse mode update here, this brings us to the 12th, and back to why looking at the forecast isn't just the whole story. And so let's pull this up and I'll walk you through what you're looking at. So this is the 12th. So the coming into the 12th, we had some interesting rainy weather. So coming into the day, we're starting at 28%. Now, what you'll notice interesting about this is that we also ended the solar day with 28%. And so here we've got a couple things going on. The skies were very clear at dawn, but you could see that was not going to last. The clouds were impending rain and just coming our way. And so the cloud cover came up pretty much just as the solar was starting its production, and it started to rain really heavy at times. And right at the time when we usually get our peak solar output as well, so that cut that off. And then just in the luck of the draw, the rains, if the rains had come by, only 5 hours later, if it had been different, boom, we would have been able to get a decent charge out. But it was what it was. And so then to compound this, this is the day that my mom takes her bath. And so space heaters, heating blankets, to make sure that she doesn't get chilled, that's all the order of the day. And so all of this load occurred, again, right when solar was producing. Okay? And so this is kind of one of those fun scenarios to look at, where what else is going on in the home during that period. And because of the timing of these loads, there was no increase at all for our total solar day percentage. The entire production went straight to the home use. And so no need to show the notes here, since they basically just tell you exactly what I just said. I'll post them in our monthly closeout format, so you can take another look at how that went. But now we come to the 13th, and so as we've seen in our previous trending, we tend to lose about 20% of the total capacity over that 14-hour period, and starting at 28% the morning of the 13th leaves us at 2%, and with some really harsh weather, as you saw in the opening video. And so what we need to remember at this point is why we're doing the project at all. The huge goal here is to put ourselves in the position of an algorithm that's controlling the system. So my hope is that the manufacturers will eventually look at some of the variables and decision points that we've identified to allow us to access the menus and the battery control software, so that we can set certain conditions manually, and then eventually have these systems so that they can run automatically in the background to help us out. And so what we're identifying here with these decision points, no matter if we make them or if the AI makes them, they still need to be effective. And so here we start to ask ourselves, was the result acceptable? Along the way, identifying key points where human interaction is necessary to keep the systems running. And certainly, this is one of those times. At 6:30 p.m., as you saw in the beginning of the video here, we were already identifying a problem. We're under 20%. We're running the risk that we're not going to make it to the following morning. Our projected weather for the next 2 to 4 days was nasty, and so what does the system do? So firstly, in this particular instance, your physical attention is needed at the system. It's on zombie apocalypse mode. It's not going to be able to turn the mains back on by itself. And so you need a representative of your household, whether yourself or somebody, who needs to actually be there to manually turn that back on. So what does the system do? Well, the system should send you an alarm. It should let you know, well, you know, you have a problem. You now need to turn the system back on. So initially, that's what we did. We set the mains to on, and we set the system to a 0 reserve, because I wanted to see, would we have made it to morning? I'm a curious guy. And then I wanted to see how the system just recovers naturally. If you, from a completely depleted state, if you set that thing to 10 or 20% of reserve power, how quickly then does it recover? And so I pull this up here. So that's showing the setting there of 0%. And so then around 7 p.m. here, we were sitting at about 18%. And now, you know, the reason that I did this instead of, you know, setting to a reserve of 10 or 20%, you know, firstly I wanted to extend to the greatest degree possible the amount of time that we ran with no grid power. Again, this is all cumulative. I want these numbers to be accurate and best case that the system can actually provide when we review these numbers at the end of the year. Also, you know, a lot of you wanted to, you know, really see what the system was capable at this time of year. And then secondly, that the storm that was coming, it's just the first day of this storm. The storm wasn't slated to be incredibly bad, so I thought, okay, well, you know, we'll at least pull something during that stormy day and be able to have at least a little bit of battery backup. And so we see what we were able to pull in the next morning, and that's what happened. And so then we set the system to 10% reserve. Later on we'll go over that, and then watched it recover. And so then here, this is the 13th. Again, that's showing our first day of very heavy rains with the system set at 10%. Then the system began to charge itself. And so again, we didn't get very much. Total daily production was only 4.7 kilowatt hours. And winds were very high. And so then we'll pull this up here. This was in the morning, and so we barely made it by the skin of our teeth. And that's showing where we matched it. Here's what we had, 0%. And yeah, it was still providing power to the house. Here's the shot from a little bit later on. Batteries still assisting. And then a little bit later still, here's where we we'd set it to 10% reserve. And then 13th back up, so you can see some of those numbers. Brought us up to 4%, and it took a little while for the system to actually get itself to the point where it was powering from the grid. This is 8:58 a.m. and then finally at 9:16 it went into its proper mode, where now it's supplying the home's usage from the grid, and it is putting all of the solar collection straight into the battery. And so then here we'll pull up the 14th. The 14th was another very stormy day. The rain had let up a little bit, but the winds really picked up, especially in the evening. And so we started our day at 4% charge, and by the end of our day we'd actually gotten back up to nearly 20%, 18%. Total production was 20 kilowatt hours, pretty good for such a stormy day. And then, like I said, Valentine's Day was an interesting day because it gave us our first look at how the system operates at that 10% reserve mark. Right? And so with that, we'll take a really quick look at the 15th. Here's the 15th. And as is our typical fashion, we close out on the total solar day following the week close. And we had 21% at the end of that total solar day. 22.2% or 22.2 kilowatt hours of production. And so then with that, gang, we'll go ahead and close out, and we'll pick up here on the 15th next week. We've got a couple of interesting things that I'll go into. And again, as always, thanks for following along with all of this. If this is the first video that you've stumbled onto, like and subscribe. Have a look at some of our previous videos if this is something that you're interested in. And by all means, this whole project here, the content is driven very much by the comments, so feel free to comment and let us know what kinds of things that you're interested in, and we'll see you next week.